Hi. After listening to Paramita's talk, I feel really bad that I have 25 minutes and she had only 15. But yeah. So I'm just going to start my talk with this quote, and I just want to give you all a few seconds to just read it and think about what the context might be. And chances are you wouldn't know who said it. It was one of the women scientists that I have interviewed. And yeah, just try to imagine what could cause somebody to say this. So for today, I wanted to speak about something that I think definitely with Geeta's talk, with the panel discussion yesterday and this morning, Prajwal's talk, we have touched upon, but I wanted to give you a little more anecdotes just to sort of give you an idea of what happens when equity is treated as a women's issue and not as a everybody problem. And I think the demographics of this room itself sort of shows that it's still largely seen as a problem that women face and women have to figure it out. Quickly, I just want to, I wanted to go through some of the earliest attempts from the government side to bridge gaps in STEM. And just to sort of show you that it's not, it may have become kind of a buzzword and a fashionable thing right now, but actually efforts have been going on quite a way back. One of the earliest would I think probably was the National Women Bioscientists Award. Of course, this is for women in life sciences. Later, I think it was renamed to Janaki Ammal Award. So that began 1999. So that's more than 25 years back. And in 2001, actually, there was the founding of the Biotech Park for Women in Tamil Nadu, which was actually quite ahead of its time because it was looking to it was the time the biotech boom was happening, and women, at least in Tamil Nadu, were studying, were enrolling in large numbers in biotechnology. So they recognized that there is this big trained workforce, and this is an opportunity to encourage them to become entrepreneurs and nurture them. And so I mean, they've faced many implementation issues over the years, but it's still functional. And one of my ideas as a journalist is to go back there and just find out what exactly happens in this park, because it's quite one of a kind, and except I don't think any of us really know what happens there and the experiences of people there. The third one I wanted to highlight was in 2003. It was called back then the Women Scientist Scheme A. Today, I think it's known as WISE PhD, if I'm not mistaken. So it was also kind of a revolutionary scheme because it was targeted at women in science who are not employed because they've had a career break of a minimum of 2 years. So again, it was to bridge this gap of already trained women in science to bring them back into the pipeline. Again, I mean, it was celebrated, I think, till about 5-6 years back. It was always the scheme that was highlighted every Women's Day, every Women in Science Day, and all the politicians love to bring it up. But I sense that in the past 5 years, it's kind of died down because there have been so many complaints about delays in funding and people waiting for 8 months, 9 months, not able to get their funding, and most of the people don't end up with full-time jobs after, so they just get this funds for 3 years and then they're kind of left. So basically, in the first decade from 1999 to the late 2000s, there was all of these things, and there were a lot of task forces, a lot of reports, and all which were, if you go back to them and read them, and we do that in Ashima, and I wrote a book called Lab Hopping, and in that we try to trace this early movement of women in science. And these reports are incredibly powerful, really good, really, really ahead of its time and very quite intersectional. So, but unfortunately, the word didn't get out, and people who needed to read them didn't read them. So the very shallow understanding that most of the public and the scientific ecosystem came out of this decade is that there's just too few women in science. And some of them thought that, oh, yeah, it would be nice to have more. Now, the implication of this superficial understanding of the situation is that if we have more women, then we have equity in science. It also implies that it treats this women as one homogeneous entity. So it's sort of encouraging the idea that all women are equally underrepresented. Similarly, again, it's under this illusion that it's only women who are underrepresented, and it sort of erases the reality of many other marginalized groups who are a lot more, in fact, underrepresented than women. And then the other little annoying things that it implies that women need help, women need to improve themselves, and finally, men have nothing to do with this. You know, it's your problem. At best, we can encourage you, but you guys figure this out. Whereas the reality is, of course, that I think by now you should know that it's not just women who are too few. And even within women in the ecosystem, there are subgroups of women who, you know, there is no comparison between the experiences between different subgroups of women. And finally, it also, I mean, in reality, all this sign that there are few women in science is not a sign that women need help, but also a consequence of the environment being favored in, being skewed in favor of men. So I'll slightly go into this. This is something that Prajwal already showed you, just to sort of illustrate the reality that it's not just women who are too few. It's a Nature report by Ankur Paliwal, which shows the caste breakup, and it's almost nil. If you're looking at Dalit and Adivasi scientists, there's, you know, the slivers, if you can even see them, and slightly improved in the, as less prestigious the institutes get, and these are still the most. And the other point about within women. So this is data got through RTIs again, early 2021. And so if you see here, if you look at the general category, or even if you look at the total professor level, associate level, assistant professor level, male as to female, it's 12 as to 106 or 10 as to 194. Let's look at professor level. 10 women, male 194, which, okay, shows there's a huge gap. But all those 10, right? No, not all those 10. 7 out of 10. Oh, sorry, all those 10. Yeah. All those 10 belong to general categories who are upper caste women. So that, you know, so by not looking at this breakup, we're completely erasing that we have not managed to get a single SC, ST, or OBC professor, woman professor in science. So there's a lot more to the story if you get access to these kind of breakups. Yeah, another, this is of ISE in specific. And finally, the last point, what I'm trying to say is that usually we think of, when we think of, you know, this as being a problem of too few women or too few, you know, of these underrepresented groups, we're focusing only on these marginalized groups. Whereas we're not focusing on the overabundant group, you know, which we also need to sort of realize that maybe the reason we usually think of the reason there are so many men in science is because there are so few women in science, so obviously the rest have to be men. But I think there's it also the other way around. The reason there are so few women in science is also because there is this very flawed system that is getting in a lot of men into men in science. You know, not all of them equally fit for the job or equally good, but because of reasons like, you know, influence and various other non-science related reasons. So I think the overrepresentation is sometimes the cause for the underrepresentation and not vice versa. Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to have a conversation with ChatGPT about this, and I thought that they made, whatever pronoun you use for ChatGPT, kind of articulated it well, so I just put it there. Yeah, so I'll get into the crux of my talk now. So what happens when equity is seen as a women's issue? And I'm going to, so all of these examples I'm telling you are from conversations I've had with scientists, mostly for our book Lab Hopping, which you can find on Amazon, or you can get in touch with me if you want to get for yourself. So just a few stories to sort of illustrate what is the kind of toll it takes on women in science because of this way of reading the issue, this way of articulating the issue. So the first thing that happens, of course, many people talk about this, is that the burden of advocacy falls on women scientists. So that's even just in, yeah, so and not only does this mean that women have to, in addition to doing their science, also they're forced to fight for their rights, fight for the rights of their colleagues, their students. But they're also punished for doing so, because there are numerous cases where these even very senior women who end up becoming advocates for women in science are seen as troublemakers, are seen as like sort of treated in very disrespectful ways. And I think the dagger to their heart is when they're not taken seriously as a scientist. So people think of them more as an activist than a scientist. And some people even, there's an insinuation that, oh, you're asking for special treatment, that kind of accusations. And of course, the outcome of this is that everything has to be done by the marginalized person themselves, and it excludes excludes or lets off others from sharing responsibility. And the most powerful example of this for me was somebody who was so illustrious and like such a top scientist. And for me to speak to her, this is something she told us when we were doing research on the book, and to realize that someone like her feels this way was especially gutting. I mean, what more do you need to do to prove yourself as a scientist? And so that first quote I told you was actually Rohini Godbole, who said it when I asked her, how does this reputation of your being a crusader for women in science, how do you take it? And she was, I mean, and she's somebody who would never say no to everything. If you just look at, she's been part of, right from the early 2000s up till her death, she's been part of almost every landmark event in this whole movement that we've been doing. So, I thought, okay, she's very happy doing this, but I didn't realize that there was this sort of side effect also that was happening. Yeah. And the other thing that happens when equity is seen as a women's issue is that a lot of the initiatives that we have towards this take on a very charitable tone. And this you can see in the language used to describe some of these schemes and awards. So it's very patronizing. It's like, I'll show you a few examples. It basically, I mean, because basically you're saying, okay, this is a scheme to help you guys out because you're not as good as the rest of us. So naturally, once they get into the system, there are many questions about their capabilities, about how meritorious they are. And you may in the end have a slightly more diverse workplace, but the atmosphere is not really inclusive if this is the treatment you get. And the other thing that's very disturbing about this is it limits how much critique you can, how much you can criticize these different schemes, because the attitude is that we're giving you this much, now don't ask for more, yeah, so it's like a nice thing we're doing. So these are just some quotes from some of the scheme descriptions, mostly from a few years back. Special opportunities. Then there's this mobility scheme that DST had, which enabled women to get jobs at places where their husband was placed so that they didn't have to drop out for that reason. But even that, the way they express that is very strange, because I mean, if you, I don't think, I mean, maybe there is a place for a scheme like this, but to only talk about fulfilling responsibilities in the domestic front only for women, and not meanwhile encouraging men also to fulfill their domestic responsibilities is really irresponsible, and it's just sort of perpetuating. We're just trying to they're just trying to make a way for us to continue this really patriarchal practice. So yeah, that was, and then this middle one I actually came across just when I was preparing for this talk, which I was quite surprised by. This is about the career break scheme, and one point was that there is a need to be careful while monitoring the projects, especially with regard to assessing the level of commitment of a women scientist, you know. So they're even these beneficiaries of these schemes are treated with this suspicion, which is really unhealthy. And yeah, I don't know how it, maybe that's why they think it's not important enough to release their funds in time. I don't know. Thirdly, of course, the thing that men are not considered stakeholders. You know, even today we call them allies. They're not like center of the problem, but somebody who's from the outside helping out. When in reality, there are enough men who stand to benefit or who also need support for things like childcare. And I think Piali's example this morning of how I think you said when your husband took a break for parental reasons, and it was something unnatural. So, you know, by excluding men, it's not, my intention is not only to say, you know, whatever male bashing or whatever you call it, but it's also like men is also not a homogeneous entity. There are single parents, there are, you know, trans men, there are adoptive parents. There are all these groups that are excluded from the support and dialogue if they're not considered stakeholders from the equity conversation. And Prajwal is on my screen because the example I thought of for this was when in 2012, the editorial, 17. In 2017, Prajwal and I think 4 or 5 other physicists did this experiment where they took over the editorship of 3 separate physics journals: Physics Today, Resonance, and Current Science. And the idea was to, I mean, they were all disturbed by the gender gap in the, you know, published articles, and they wanted to see for themselves, is it really so hard? So they took this challenge that we're going to make one issue that's women-only authors. And they did it really beautifully. And according to Prajwal, it was a lot easier than she imagined it being. You know, they thought that maybe it'll be really hard to get women authors, but it was a lot easier than they expected. But the idea that they had was to prove this and then to show that to the editors that you can do this and leave the scene. But instead, I don't know if anything has changed. I've taken the liberty to quote Prajwal here, that they came back the next month, the editors, and they went back to their old routines. But every year they did approach them to produce another special issue. They were very happy with this, you know, 1 month of being equal, and then so that's just like a sad/funny example of what happens. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was problematic portrayals. And as somebody who works, you know, in the media myself, we have also a lot of accountability to take for this, where because the issue is seen as there are too few women. Women are often like forced to become role models when they do something special, you know. So if of course, like going to space is an extreme example, but if there is a woman who is part of any project, the fact that she is a woman makes a lot of news. And while many women accept that responsibility of role modelship with grace, some of them, I mean, it's done without their consent. It's like you have the responsibility of inspiring people, so you get all these interview requests, and a lot of the interviews don't talk about your work, but talk a lot more about your domestic life and what challenges you faced, which is all, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's, there are issues with that. But more than that, it also, and we have seen this in ourselves because we have interviewed hundreds of women scientists, from young people to older ones. And the young people, especially when they get any sort of limelight, there's a lot of professional jealousy. that happens. So they are penalized, people, their colleagues at best make fun of them, at worst sometimes seriously affect. I mean, there was one person who told me about her PhD, her published paper that she's working on for her PhD. And because we spoke about it, it seems the doctoral committee said that they can't, they have to, unless she pulls down the article, they have to revoke her PhD, or I don't know what. It was all published work, but we did that because we didn't get that into trouble. So we've come across this in many ways, people accused of chasing fame. One quick example, I think some of you may have heard of Madhavi Lata. She was in the limelight earlier this year because she was one of the engineers who made the Chenab bridge possible, and there was a lot of media coverage. But even before the media coverage, she had been giving, talks. She was very much into outreach. But of course, when the media started covering, they started covering it in very, ways like she was responsible for making the building. And I think you could have just taken it with a pinch of salt, but I started looking at the comments below LinkedIn articles about her, and there were tons of comments like this, so many hurt men who were really upset that she is receiving the limelight, which, I don't know, which I guess it is, if you look at it neutrally, it's fine because it was teamwork. In the end, she had to do this huge LinkedIn post mentioning every single person who was part of it. And she also pleaded with the media to not make her unnecessarily famous. So that was like a very sort of ugly sort of affair, which I think comes out of this point of view. Yeah, so I'm going to wrap up kind of abruptly. So what is the solution to this is to, instead of looking at this as a problem where some groups of people need help, we need to look at what is still lagging in Indian science. And there are many things. There is, academic misconduct. There is, in terms of, I don't know, we're not getting a Nobel Prize, if that's what matters to you. And the very simple thing of there's so many societal, very basic problems that science is still not being able to solve. So could that be because, that is likely, I would say that it is because our workforce is not diverse enough, our ways of thinking are not diverse enough. And so that is the need, that is the reason we need equity, and not so that we can help women or someone else. And again, I'm stealing from Prajal's talk this morning because I felt like this way of articulating things is also a really good example of how we can change our language when we're talking about equity. So this is something that doesn't talk about women in science, but really this is what we're trying to do. And it says physicists, but it applies for anything else. This is the reason why we need more diversity. And yeah, I think there is a little bit of change because this is a report that came from CSIR Institute last year, and the way they are now finally articulating it is so much better. Empowering women in science is vital not only to foster inclusivity, but also to drive scientific advancement and meet the demands of the evolving world. Society can gain. Their participation is essential for holistic problem solving. So it's kind of changing, at least on paper, and maybe, I don't know, things will get better. I felt a responsibility to end it on a positive note. But yeah, thanks for listening. I just wanted to, share this with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will start by bragging a little. I was one of the authors of that 2017 special issue of Resonance. Thanks, Prajal, for that opportunity. Yeah, questions.
You mentioned about one of the schemes as part of the change, like VOSA scheme. So I mean, of course, it might have been started with the intention of bringing a change, but I have seen repercussions in the opposite direction. I know people who were awarded VOSA fellowship, but they were now struggling in getting a permanent position, although government schemes were to getting them back to academia, but now they are facing challenges, but they are taken as like a weaker fellowship because of some reservations or whatever reasons they were not able to get into academia or had a break.
Right.
So this was not really implemented in a way it should be. Like if you want to bring back women in science and there has been a platform, it should be taken up also. So I mean, I appreciate that these agencies are thinking designing such schemes for bringing women, but then the implementation is not in a correct format that it helps. It in fact basically ruins their career because now they have invested furthermore years in that career, and after that they are good for nothing else other than getting into research. So it was very sad to hear these stories from, because in my own institutes where I was earlier, I know people who were like really struggling hard to get one permanent position, and
so they would not have the same prestige as like an Inspire fellow.
no, nothing,
Right.
nothing. And also apart from, I mean, even if in terms of fellowship, when they are applying to a permanent roles, they are considered to be like, okay, they had a break. So it's not taken as a, positive sign, or they wanted to come back and they're passionate enough to continue their research, even if after whatever reasons. It is taken as a negative rather than positive. So that implementation or the break in those, or rather reformation in our rules, it while for the hiring process also has to be done if it has to be implemented positive.
No, nobody goes in the track after
Nobody gets
I have not heard of a single person who has been able to get a permanent position after this.
So their argument, when I spoke to the DST person who did not want to be named, but what he's saying that it was never meant to give them permanent job. It was meant to be a bridge program. But I'm like, maybe these people would have found something else to do. You've just wasted 3 more years of their life.
Yeah.
And
payment is an issue.
Yeah.
I know I was not paid for 2 years.
And this is actually a problem
of the 3 years.
And if Inspire is considered as prestigious fellowship, I am also one of them who didn't get first 6 months, no fellowship at all. But every year also we have to wait for a few months to get the sanction, and then you have to wait for another year that the money will be delivered to payment will be done. So, and in fact, in the feedback also, they circulated the feedback after completion of the Inspire. I did put this as a point because I was a Newton Fellow in the UK as well. And there, before I arrived the country, for entire duration, my fellowship was within the university. And I had no single day. In fact, university was bugging me, you get your bank account so that we can put the money in your account. And however, when I moved back to India, the situation was I mean, of course, for me, it was not a big monetary challenge, but I know people with families will face that challenge. And when they are specifically for, men, if they have families, they have to support their kids and everything, school fees or whatever. It was really painful to hear those stories from Inspire faculty as well. So yeah, it's very sad situation that the government agencies are not taking it as serious matter. I mean, it's a money matter. It's not a small issue. You are not giving salary in time.
Thanks, Aru.
Anyone? Back there?
Hi, nice talk. I had just a question because you mentioned also equity, and sometimes I felt inequity discussions like, there is also in general in academia also, like since I'm a faculty now, I'm in committees, when the question of like a trans or non-binary or pronouns come into the discussion, usually there is like it's considered a fad or it's not taken seriously. And especially in I personally know of a lot of people who are not out as trans people. And is there a real gap? And is it a perception of like safety where like there is some erasure of trans people in a lot of the equity discussions?
Are you asking me if there is
Yeah, I just want to know, like, if
Yeah,
you
I think
perceive it
so,
also.
because even, those who are out, what they have to go through just to make people use their preferred pronouns, and how, uh, I mean, I think we're really nowhere with it. And most people seem to think that let's go one step at a time, let's first get things right for cis women and then we'll shift to trans women. But it doesn't work that way, because what happens is now we're just pushing them down further. Like, I like to think of a pie and think that most of the pie, 80% of the pie is eaten by men, only 20% is women. And now we're trying to give women more of the pie, but I think the sliver that is belonging to the other groups, whether it's trans people or marginalized castes, that when the women is being expanded, that is also reducing even more. So I feel like it is actually detrimental to take that approach of, okay, those things you leave aside. We have to first deal with women and then we'll go there. I mean, I'm guilty of this myself. I think maybe around 5 or 6 years back is when I also started really taking, trans scientists' views, thinking that is part of the dialogue. I also kind of thought we are women in science and stuff. So, but now one of my colleagues at the Life of Science, Shayantan, is themselves trans. So that itself, having somebody from, basically it's another example of how diversity, how much it's like improved our coverage of everything. The kind of projects that we do is really, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I don't have an answer to your question, but I think it's, there is a huge gap. Yeah. Amal. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay, so you were telling about this seen as troublemakers. So I would like if Prajwal talk something about it, because you were advocating on this, and have you ever been seen as a more feminist and not a very good scientist, or the issues that Nandita was mentioning?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, yeah, I mean, I sensed that was the case right in the beginning. So I would not talk about the work I did on equity in my institute, except with people I trusted. And for example, IUPAP, I've been working for the IUPAP working group since 2011. And I would not talk about that. In my institute, we typically, if we went for a conference, we would come back and report about the conference to the whole community. And I would do that for my science conferences, but I wouldn't do it for this. And I have heard comments that, oh, she started to do all this woman stuff. So how can she do science? Not even bothering to see what science I've done. I mean, the science I've done is out there. It's not like hidden or something, students or whatever. But there will be this comment made. And it would actually be made by people who are decision makers, so who would decide on promotions and stuff.
I think Prajwal is being very honest, but I also want to say that I don't remember, I don't know if you'd remember, but I had asked you a very similar question. So there's another very senior woman scientist who told us that even today she doesn't call herself a feminist because she knows she would be sidelined by the men groups that she has access to, which is important because somebody like her being part of those groups also is important. But she said that she doesn't rankle them too much. And I remember asking Prajwal, maybe the phrasing was a little different, but I remember asking Prajwal what she thought about this. And you said something like, it's true, I would be sidelined, but also it's irresponsible of me to it would be irresponsible if I completely, did not speak out. Or yeah, I think you said it better. But I just wanted to say that maybe in the past Prajwal has done that, but I think she has made trouble. Thanks to her. Thanks to her. And another really memorable thing, I asked Shobana Narasimhan. I don't know if you might know her. She's a very senior scientist in JNCSR. She once said in a talk that people see me as trouble because I'm always bringing up these things, but I just look at myself as a fly who's just going to these buffaloes and constantly bothering them. So yeah, so I mean, I admired that spirit of hers, not taking herself too seriously.
Very drastic difference in India and I mean, if you apply abroad, there is a special, I mean, a separate section where you have to elaborate what you have done and as a scientist for equity, diversity, and inclusion. However, in India, even when I was at a stage of applications, so I was also in India, don't highlight that you have done anything for equity, but while in abroad, I have to express
an
it.
incentive,
Yeah, so what all activities I have taken part in and these things. Yeah. So this was strange.
I think Gati was maybe supposed to do that, incentivize, things that you're doing for equity. But
yeah, generally.
Right.
Yeah, so they explicitly ask for the description. It's
right.
another statement.
Yeah.
Just like a research statement, they have a statement of equity, diversity, and inclusion. But while in India, it's not.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that if the Gati scheme works as it should, and institutes are incentivized for being gender aware, then maybe the hiring processes also, because people will want people who
to work
start
for,
things. But yeah, I mean, I think
implementation of that.
Yeah,
how
yeah.
effective it is.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, just for the record, the mobility scheme has been scrapped.
Yeah.
So it
Did it take off at all? Actually,
there were a couple of people who got it, and then I think one of them had to file a case and all that because they just messed it up like big time. And I think eventually she got she got the salary and etc. But it ran into big time trouble. They had just not thought it through. Actually, when they launched it, I was in some meeting, so I requested them what does it take for you to make it open to everybody? They simply
By
wouldn't
everybody,
get
you mean
it.
men also.
Men and and I gave them an example also that it could be that the woman is working in a city where there are multiple institutes and her spouse could get a position, whereas he might be working in a city where there's no other institute and only one specialty where she wouldn't have a chance. So then wouldn't that be unfair? And they said, oh, maybe next time we do the call, we will open it and so on. But it got killed. Also, that women thing, it's an example of how an intervention can cause harm, because if there is
editorial?
No. Whatever WUSA, whatever it is called now, because now they made it 5 years. And now you don't have to have a career break, as I understand it. So if there's a faculty position where there are two people, let's say, in the top list, and one of them happens to be a man, then institutes will tell the woman, you apply for that, and you'll get it, and give the position to the man. And the applicant will be in a vulnerable position, not in a position to call the shots and that you're talking nonsense and whatever else. So they would, so it can actually cause harm.
Yeah. Good point.
This probably is the most interesting discussion we are having, but we do need to proceed to the next talk.